Chapter 2. Jessica opened the door to her modest, modern ranch-style house with one hand and grabbed a handful of mail out of the box. She fought briefly with an energetic storm door and shuffled into her neatly kept living room. She walked around the gleaming titanium form of her racing bicycle and whispered softly to the crouching tiger of a bike, "Tomorrow, hun, we will go for a fast ride tomorrow. I promise." Dropping her keys on her end table, she took the day's postal delivery over to the trash can to sort. 2 credit card offers, a postcard from a company wanting to sell vinyl siding, and a political flyer all hit the round file on the floor. The water bill went into the small folder that she used for financial things. She gave a casual glance through the women's magazine that she had ordered to help the new band uniform fundraiser, and was rewarded with a shower of pull-out cards that had somehow survived the trip from the publisher to her kitchen, only to take flight across her well-scrubbed wood floor. Of course, she thought, one simply had to land under the table in the exact middle. She sighed and dropped the magazine on the counter next to the financial folder, and looked at the last of the day's mail. It was a letter postmarked Colorado Springs, on the stationery of the United States Air Force Academy. Philip. Jessica quickly tore the envelope open and drank in the message from her younger brother. "Dear Miss Thomas, I am writing to inform you that your younger sibling, Cadet Philip Thomas, has successfully completed his first month of classes without flunking out. I have survived so far, and while I cannot say I am having fun, it has been very interesting. Things are going well enough, I suppose. Class work is hard, big surprise there, but I am catching on all right. I am guessing by now you have converted my bedroom into a bordello of sin, and have collected a harem of slaves to satisfy your every desire. You have always looked like the type that would do that." Grin. "Seriously, I hope you have had some time to spend with Kevin now that you aren't chasing after ball games all of the time. I know it had to crimp your style to spend every night either in some meeting for the paper or in the stands watching me play. Well, I don't have much to say, but I promised I would write, so I did. Take care and be sure to cook Kevin breakfast before you throw him out in the morning. Love, Y.A." Philip. Jessica sat the letter down and thought about the glint of mischief that doubtless was in her little brother's eye when he wrote the note. "Philip thinks I should be cooking Kevin breakfast." She wondered where the time had gone, and marveled at how Philip had grown up seemingly overnight. Cook Kevin breakfast. Kevin. Frantically she looked at the clock. 6:12 p.m., and then she sighed. Well, it wasn't the first time she had forgotten to return his call, and it likely wasn't the last. Well, she considered, if he wanted to talk he would call. Jessica sat down in the chair and reread the letter. She put it down on the solid oak tabletop and looked out the window. Cook Kevin breakfast. The thought had occurred to her many times over the course of their on-again, off-again relationship. While there had been intimate moments, there had never been any breakfasts. For Jessica and Kevin, there never seemed to be time for long romantic walks on the beach, or long, leisurely nights of lovemaking. No, she thought, while at times the relationship had been quite passionate, things always seemed a little, well, hasty. There was always somewhere that one of them seemed to need to be. Kevin DeWitt was the town's most successful trial lawyer, a handsome and charming rascal with a face that would light up any room he entered. Tall and classically featured, Kevin DeWitt was what most women would consider a big catch. Jessica certainly enjoyed his company, and while they had dated for years now, there had always been an understanding that theirs was not an exclusive relationship. Well, she thought, not exclusive on his end, anyway. Strangely, as she was thinking about Kevin, the image in her mind started wandering towards the dashing face of David Miller. Perhaps, she mused, it wasn't so strange. After all, he was darned good-looking, and those jeans were tight enough to show that Mr. Miller was all man. Jessica rolled her eyes skyward as she flopped down on the couch. "You are acting like a 13-year-old schoolgirl with a crush on her teacher," she said aloud to nobody. "Get a grip." "Yeah," the little devil voice inside of her said, "get a grip. Get yourself a big old handful of." Jessica stretched out on the sofa and gave into some guilty pleasure. Well, she thought, if I was going to turn Philip's room into a bordello, a certain Mr. Something Garotha would be a fine man to have in there. "Did Jessica find you earlier, David?" asked Arnie Cox as he was putting away the last of his tools in the darkening dusk. She did, David replied. She was asking a lot of questions. Yeah, that's our Jessica. Don't think anything about it, though, it's her job, and she takes her job really seriously. Cox said, of course, this is a small town, so the news is not really the news, if you know what I mean. David stared at the man blankly, trying to comprehend. Actually, I don't. Arnie leaned up against the side of his work truck and studied the man from the city. Fair enough, he said. I suspect it's quite a bit different where you come from, but around here, folks keep pretty close track of what's going on. The Sentinel is a weekly paper, they print it on Tuesday and they mail it out on Wednesday. If you were dependent on the newspaper for your news, you would be well informed one day a week. Well, he continued with a smile, folks around here don't wait around until Wednesday to get their news, they get it just a little quicker. You want to know what's going on, all you have to do is join me tomorrow morning at the coffee shop, and you will learn everything that's worth repeating, and likely a whole lot that ain't. Jake serves up the coffee and pie, and if he doesn't know something, then it ain't going on. Course, if you do show up, Arnie paused for effect, I expect you might get asked a question or two. Well, David asked, if you already know what's going on, then what do you need the newspaper for? Oh, Arnie replied, because something ain't official unless it's been in the Sentinel. David wished Arnie a good evening, and went back to the room that he was staying in at the back of the house, wondering if he had, indeed, fallen down the rabbit hole. It had been several months since Jessica had been haunted by a nightmare, but as she sat bolt upright in her bed, covered in a cold sweat, she had to admit that tonight's dream was a doozy. Tonight she dreamed that it was her sitting there in the car that night, instead of Susan. She could see it as clearly as if it had really happened to her. She could hear the hum of the road, could see the flashes of the yellow dotted center line, and all of the sudden there were lights flashing in her eyes, her mother screaming, her father desperately turning the wheel away from the oncoming semi-truck. She could hear him shouting out, "Oh God," just before. No, Jessica felt herself become numb, and for a few minutes, or a few hours she sat there in the dark cold, alone and shivering. Later, wide awake, Jessica stared at the ceiling and thought about her life. She was 17 at the time of the accident, the only member of her family who was not in the car. It was like this every time she had the nightmare. The memories came back to her, Bill and Emma walking over to her while she was in uniform cheering on the boys, Emma's arm around her, as the state troopers told her that they were so very sorry. She remembered the endless car ride to the hospitals so that she could be with Philip as he fought for his life, and she remembered standing all alone at her parents' funeral. She could still see in her mind the 2 rosewood caskets sitting there on the machines that would lower them into the ground. She could smell the damp, cold air, with the scent of freshly turned dirt mixing with the sickly sweet perfume of the mounds of flowers. She also remembered the promise that she made to her parents that day, the sacred vow to them that she would raise Philip in a way that would make them proud. Jessica Thomas lay on her bed waiting for sleep, with tears rolling slowly down her cheeks into the darkness. Philip was now a man, and he was a man that would make her parents very proud. She had kept her promise. David Miller decided to skip the coffee shop in the morning and wait until Wednesday for his news. He, too, had spent a sleepless night in the house on the hill, and was ready to get some work done. Arnie Cox and his crew showed up at 7 a.m., and he found David drinking a cup of coffee outside the north door of the mansion house. "You do good work, Arnie," David told him. "I went up on the roof this morning, and took a look at how things were going. Your people really know their job. I have some good folks," Arnie said. "I am real proud of the work that they do." Not for the first time, David realized that he was not a small talk specialist. He decided to cut to the chase, and talk to Arnie about what he really wanted to know. "Hey, Arnie," he said with a casualness that he did not feel, "how well do you know that girl reporter that was here yesterday?" "Well," Arnie said, "I guess you could say I know her fairly well." "Why do you ask?" Hell, David thought, I can't tell him that I am fascinated by her for many reasons, and that I want to know everything there is to know about her, now can I? Well, he considered, when in doubt, try the truth, or at least a part of the truth. She seems very, attractive, and I was wondering, is she single? Arnie broke into a big smile. She's not married. She has a thing going with a local lawyer. He is a pretty big shot around these parts. I keep hoping for her sake that it's more serious than it appears to be. You like Jessica a lot, don't you, Arnie? David asked. I do, I surely do, Arnie replied. Jessica is good people. Smart, pretty as can be. You already could see that for yourself. Let me tell you though, that girl has had a hard go of it. Back when she was in high school, her folks and her sister and brother were in a car crash. It was bad, real bad, and her folks and sister were killed. Arnie stopped and shook his head. The Thomas were good people, honest, involved in the community. He was a banker and she was a teacher. Anyways, Philip, her younger brother, he was in the crash too, but he got better. Jessie was only 17 and still in high school when her folks passed. He continued, and she took it upon herself to raise Philip. He was, let me see, he was about 8 or so at the time, and the folks around here decided to let her give it a try. She got some help from Bill and Emma Hoyle at the Sentinel, and they hired her right away when she got out of school. That girl has worked like a dog ever since to make sure Philip got everything he needed. Arnie shared. Philip's a good kid, too. He played ball with my boy for years. Philip is off at the Air Force Academy, though he isn't playing ball there. My boy's gonna start at linebacker before the year is out, coach tells him. That's great, David said, still considering Jessica Thomas. You must be very proud of your son. That I am, said Arnie. I am also kinda proud about giving whoever I am working for an honest day, so I had better get at it. He lifted his coffee cup in salute to David, and walked away talking into his two-way radio. Well, David thought to himself, now you know. After all of these years of wondering, now you know.